Fountainhead Forum 1, Hodey Johns is part of the We Are Libertarians podcast. He's also a fairly advocate Christian libertarian and also a somewhat critic of the Mises Caucus. I'd like to bring him on here to discuss some of his libertarian journey, as well as some of his criticisms and some of his praise for the Mises Caucus as well. How you doing, Hodey?
Doing great, Chris. I always vowed to be one of the people where being anti-Mises Caucus is not part of their identity. So I guess I've already messed that up.
Well, I'm sorry. That was one thing I wanted to bring you on here before. You know, out of all the shows, although there's so many shows out there, you had on a nice debate between two Mises Caucus people, two non-Mises Caucus people.
Yeah.
You seem to be one person who is sincerely interested in bringing all of these people together. But let's get started first. Tell me about your libertarian journey. When did you become a libertarian, and your political journey, that kind of thing?
Awesome. No, thanks for having me on. I was just making a joke about the Mises Caucus thing. I love everybody out there. Yeah. For my journey, I come from former Republican Party. And I was part of a movement. Some people may remember this. It's been a while, the Tea Party, which dates me a little bit. And this was kind of a movement that started sweeping up, where it was like, hey, maybe we should stop doing the bigotry thing. Maybe we should start embracing diversity, which is really something that the Republican Party had not been good at for a while. And then the huge one, well, they're all huge, but another huge point was maybe let's actually get serious about economic, what the Republicans pretend to do, economic conservatism. Like, let's actually reduce the size and scope of the federal government. And then let's actually embrace these people that we haven't been very nice to in the past. And I was really excited about it. I was a Republican before that. I worked for the George W. Bush campaign. Obviously, that really didn't pan out the way we wanted it to. I felt like this was going to be a great path forward. And what really happened, just in essence, is the RNC started doing stuff that the DNC has become famous for. And that's challenging our own candidates, throwing out our signatures, saying nope, taking us to court if needs be. They wanted their RNC candidates. And the weird part is in the thick of the Tea Party, this was really a groundswell throughout the United States. And the RNC was like, no, we're not going to have any of that. We would rather lose with our guys than win with your guys. And they lost. I mean, everybody remembers the Obama years, they got dominated, but it was purely because they did not want to change this identity of the Republican Party. And so when I was going out, an ex-political, I speech and debate in college, 3 national titles with Liberty University, whoop, whoop, go Flames. That was really my background, was all politics. And so I said, where do I go next? The Libertarian Party was not one that I admit that I was familiar with. And I remember seeing Ron Paul on the stage. I wasn't as anti-war yet. So at that point, I don't think Ron Paul really made that he did on most libertarians. Good for you guys who got the Ron Paul being cool before I got it. You're just ahead of the curve. I don't know. I was a war hawk for way too long. But, I was fine with him, didn't think anything of him, but I hadn't heard much about the Libertarian Party when I discovered that, in essence, it was what I was campaigning for, actually shrinking the size of the economy and meaning it, and actually being socially individualistic. Every individual matters, and we love people. And for me, I was like, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I can't believe it took me that long. I fit like a glove in the Libertarian Party. Kind of grew with my libertarian chops there for a while, had a bit of a falling out with the Libertarian Party about 2 years ago, but it really wasn't so much. I think a lot of people will talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about kind of the Mises Caucus takeover. The culture was changing, but flatly, I had become better at doing non-political things. And I think that's fine. People need to do what they're gifted at, and I was not as gifted at. It's easy to be gifted in a Republican campaign because they give you everything. The judges are on your side. The people are on your side. You have major factions. You got big supporters. You got to scrape and claw as a libertarian. So the people who are good at libertarian strategizing, I've worked on a few campaigns. Hats off to you. I did my best to answer all the emails, and I took more of a background role. And now I'm just kind of happy I'm changing the culture more locally. We're doing we made actually headlines when we fought with the police here in Ogden, Utah. That was about 4 years ago now with our homeless situation. I've done some in the Libertarian Party newsletter. You may have seen my blurb there about we fed the prisoners as well. And I'm just more about changing the culture locally now. But no ill will to the Libertarian Party. I definitely wish it all the success that it can get, because we need one.
So was there any one book or any one person who influenced you? You interesting, you were Tea Party, but you weren't necessarily a part of, a Ron Paul Republican, as you might describe yourself. But yeah.
Yeah, I was probably more like a Glenn Beck kind of Republican, would be the better way to put it at that time period. Yeah, I didn't fall in love with economics until after joining the Libertarian Party. I knew that I wanted the government smaller, but I wouldn't have been able to say, like, here are the core pillars of capitalism like I would now, or here's some core tenets, and I didn't know the difference between an Austrian, a Chicagoan economist, and so I didn't really get interested in all of that until joining the Libertarian Party. And that's one of the perks of having a culture of liberty, is it introduces people that are open to it with stuff like this that I wouldn't ordinarily have opened myself to. As far as like exact literature, I had already read and enjoyed Atlas Shrugged, but I wouldn't say like it changed my mind. I was still a Republican after reading it. It just certainly in my head, when I heard libertarian things, I was like, oh, there's a lot of Ayn Rand here, and I liked her, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. Ayn Rand definitely has, certainly had an influence on me. If you go back to the old founding fathers of the LP, it's almost all due to Ayn Rand. I mean, it's really interesting to see how the movement's evolved in that sense. I think the healthy movement, you want to have multiple gurus. If you do have one guru, it sort of turns into a cult. And I think it's important, just to have, not really, to have more than one guru for yourself too. But sounds like you do. Yeah. It was interesting how the Tea Party got hijacked so quickly. I mean, it started out as a response to those TARP bailouts, but then it just went off on all these tangents, and and you must have seen that too then. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I wrote up a story about this for an old We Are Libertarians newsletter that we actually published, colorized. It was awesome. It was very brief. Our editor kind of ended up having a fallout with the Liberty movement in general, the guy who was running the newsletter. But that newsletter was really cool, something I'm proud of. And I actually detailed this story. And I remember like marching in Denver. I was in Colorado at the time, and marching in Denver. And I had like I remember the irony, because we had like rainbow flags, and I was marching next to like somebody who was my friend who happened to be homosexual. And I remember he got pelted by an egg. And I just remember the irony of like these people like calling us like all the like bigots and slurs. And I was just like, you guys, like, you just hit a gay person with an egg. Like, you really don't know what you're doing. And so there was a lot of accusations, of course, that we were that like bigotry was like a big part of it. And the weird thing is, it was so not tolerated. I don't know if you'll remember this, but there was like a $5,000 bounty or something if you could find even one one sign that was big. And so it was very self-policed, because we were all aware that that bounty was in place. And so when some infiltrator would try to come in and be like, yeah, let's talk about sending the immigrants back over the border, we'd be like, no, get out of here. And there's actually a video that went viral with somebody talking to a member of the DNC who, like, he had like Dora taped to a poster. He got kicked out, and somebody followed him back to this guy and was like the DNC actually tried to infiltrate the Tea Party to make us look racist. Thankfully, there's a lot of self-policing kicking him out. Now, as far as it getting co-opted, that's just part of the RNC. The libertarians had no liberty-minded people at that time in the Republican Party had nowhere to go. I went to the Libertarian Party, but some of them just were like, I'm going to try again with this. I'm going to stay in the Republican Party. And I know it failed this time, but I'm going to try to make the RNC see reason and become better. Obviously, it didn't work, but that's what they tried. Some people just left politics altogether. That's probably what I should have done. But then I don't know. I wouldn't have found so much of what I did with the Libertarian Party. So even if I'm better outside of it, I like the changes and the transformations that I became a better person having made those friendships and worked on some of those campaigns. So I guess I can't say I regret it, but that's just kind of what happens when like your overarching mechanism collapses on you. Everybody scatters. You think of like a tree. Some people scatter right, some people scatter left, some people scatter, some people go long with it, try to outrun the tree falling down, and they're not together anymore. So when the RNC came down on the thick of the party, I mean, it was the heart of it, was this Tea Party movement. People still remember it. And I mean, it was really the heart of it. So when the RNC was like, no, we're not doing this, it really just scattered everybody. And unfortunately, when you lose that central control, you can kind of co-opt it and say, the RNC is like, well, this is what the Tea Party is now. And then you had like Michelle Malkin and like her, the gay camps, gay conversion therapy camps, and like claiming to be part of the Tea Party after they had already squished it. So it was just kind of, the people who took it over they really didn't do a good job.
Yeah. When I was living in Ohio, we were, some of my, we were some pro-gun people were going to do something with the Pink Pistols, and some other people like, no, don't work with the, Pink Pistols as gay gun owners.
Right.
And other people were like, no, don't work with the Pink Pistols. I said, well, they're gun owners. They support gun rights. That's, and yeah, but the Tea Party was quickly flamed out. It was unfortunate. Yeah. So, so one thing interesting is, I remember you said, I hope the Mises Caucus blows my mind.
Yeah.
Where would you say that is now? We're almost 3 months from the Reno reset. Has the Mises Caucus blown your mind? Are you happy? Or even though you weren't a Mises Caucus supporter, right? You're actually rooting for the Mises Caucus to succeed, which I think some of these other people are actually rooting for them to fail. But
sure, I don't. I think this is an important way to delineate the two critics of the Mises Caucus. Is there's the ones that they give you criticism because they want you to fail, and there's the one that criticize you because they want you to succeed. I did make a post. I mean, full disclosure, I'm very skeptical on, just because of the culture and my interactions with them, that they can. And I've said so before, but that doesn't change my want for them to succeed. Obviously, the world is better with liberty, and whether I squabble with Dave Smith and Michael Heiss, I don't care about that. If somebody is able to see their kids who got locked up in prison for smoking a plant, I care about that, right? So a healthy liberty movement is so big, and that is so much more important than any of our petty dramas that we could have. That's not to say that every drama is petty. I find that some are rather important. I think myself, especially with representing individualism like I do, there's a lot of individual people that are struggling with systemic problems, policing and bullying and things like that I think they absolutely deserve our love, our assistance, and deserve to be represented in the Libertarian Party. They weren't being. And so, I called it quits. I didn't, and I won't say they weren't being represented because there are some people who do, right? It's a quantitative thing. And this is tough because you're always going to find an exception. People are going to say like, well, you're right leaning. And they'll be like, well, I just did a quote from Noam Chomsky last week. What do you want? And it's like, well, I don't know if that dismisses every single accusation, but anyway, as far as assessment of the Mises Caucus so far, I hear the money numbers are awesome. That's something that unfortunately we kind of can't find out until what I understand, if I understand correctly, the end of the year. I like Todd, the treasurer, and seems like a trustworthy guy, so I have no reason to believe like he's fibbing or anything. But that very first month, it occurred at the end of the month and the beginning of another. And so I remember looking up the filing report and being like, well, we've got like the last 3 days of this month. I can't, after the takeover, I don't really have the full numbers here yet. And then the next month after, I'm a smart guy. I'm not necessarily informed about everything. So from what I understand, a lot of the financial numbers are not reported on those FEC filing sheets. And so if Todd says they're big and they're huge, and they're big and they're huge, and that's awesome. I mean, I know some reports were up to $500,000 in that 1 month. I think Joshua Smith reported something around 400,000, and I think the whole operating budget for the Libertarian Party prior to this was like 1.1 million in a year per year. So I mean, being able to make over a third of what you ordinarily make, in a year, just in like one weekend, is absolutely unreal. So and having worked on campaigns, I'm telling you, even successful campaigns for the Republican Party, fundraising is everything. So if you can fundraise, that's awesome. So that's already off to a huge start right there. I know the membership numbers. I've seen 2 sets of data. I know Karen and Harlow said, it's not what it seems. I know the numbers look down, but they're actually very high. We're actually increasing in number. Don't worry about it. And of course, the critics of the Mises Caucus were like, no, it's very low. Problem is, when some dunce like me, I'd like to actually just see numbers. But since I'm a dunce and I don't have access to everything, I have 2 very biased sides saying they're good and they're bad. So let's go ahead and call that a wash. And if the numbers are the same, but they're making more money, fine, that works. I know I want to say probably the most successful thing about the Mises Caucus, or the Mises Caucus take over the Libertarian Party so far, is the Libertarian Party has one job, and that's a vehicle for elections. We have 1,000 other vehicles for messaging and for, writing books, something that I'm working on, changing the culture, feeding the homeless, all these drives, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of different outlets that you can promote liberty. But not Mises Caucus, the point of the Libertarian Party is to get people elected. So we're really actually about to see what is the most successful thing for the Mises Caucus. And I will say the Libertarian state of Pennsylvania, as libertarian as it can be, was our most successful affiliate when it comes to elections. And I believe, of course, the Mises Caucus took over. There's a big hubbub about that. They're going to be like, well, where are we going to go? That was our most successful affiliate. They took it over. They kicked out, well, not kicked out. The old people have dissipated. And so is this going to be good or bad? And I believe I heard they had like 20 plus more people running for office in Pennsylvania than before. Now, of course, the old numbers were successful elections. So like I said, we still have to see how they run a campaign. And we're going to find that out very soon. We've got these midterms coming up in the fall. And so we're going to see how the Mises Caucus does. Another big success up until, and I got to qualify this, up until the beginning of August, I thought the Libertarian Party social media was awesome. Of course, we ended up hiring somebody at the beginning of August, and there is a noticeable change in tone. It's not for me. It's not my style. For some people, it is their style. And you know what? We need to reach people who have different styles. So if you need more not Hodeys in the party, I can't tell you if it's bringing more people in or driving them out. I know for me, it is not pleasant, but I know for some people it is. However, I will say before that, I believe it was being run by Dave Smith, and I thought it was great. In fact, I would love to see Dave Smith kind of do this full time, because I think he's and because of his persona, right? Being a comedian, being part of the Legion of Skanks, he's used to making unsavory jokes, and it's too late. Your face is there. You're on screen. You've said the K word about Jews. You said the F word about homosexuals. You said, it's all out there. So unfortunately, because that's your face, that's always going to be attached to you. Right. And that's somewhat unfortunate, because I don't think everybody wants to be responsible for the mistakes they made, when they were 12, but welcome to this era of politics. If your face is caught saying something, then you're in a lot of trouble. But I think it was a great position for him, because what he can do is then say, let's take away my face, but keep my positive liberty messaging, which people love. And I loved, and so I thought the libertarian messaging was great. I would love to see him take it back over from Reed Cooley, if that's a possibility. I don't know. I think he's the communications director, if I understand correctly. And I would love to see Dave in that position instead. I don't know if he was officially that before, if he just had access to it or whatever. But I would like to see that a little bit. I would like to see that change reverted. But I do want to say that the Libertarian Party social media before the takeover was, I mean, nothing. 13 likes on a post, you know, I mean, and it was always in this hybrid place. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but this part is actually my best point. I finally got to it, guys. That the Libertarian Party was like, well, our vehicle is more for elections, right? We want to win elections. We're not here for messaging, but they would still message from it, right? So their whole thing was, well, we don't want to say anything that's like a message. We just want to talk about getting people to the polls with this account, let other people do it. But they still posted stuff. Like remember the whole silence is consent scandal, and then you had quoting the Church of Satan on Easter scandal. And it was just weird because they wouldn't message often, but they'd always seem to do badly when they did it. And so it was a nothing thing. Here's the thing. I understand the Libertarian Party, as I've mentioned, its purpose is to get people elected. We can judge the Mises Caucus 100% based on how well people get elected. I mean, that's the purpose of the Libertarian Party. If they message poorly, that sucks. But their purpose isn't messaging, it's getting elected. Even so, the RNC and DNC will throw out stuff on their Twitter and social media to get people to follow them, to get people to join so that they can win elections. I hosted the presidential debates for the Libertarian Party, and I got to tell you, they wouldn't post them. They didn't want them on social media. Nick Sarwark did this whole like, oh, did you? I didn't even know they were going on. So I filed an official thing to get them posted. And then I asked him about it, and he's like, oh, no, we should talk about it. And then one of my regional representatives were like, yeah, we talked about it, and they don't want to do it. I'm like, well, so that's even about getting elected, and they weren't doing a good job. So the Libertarian Party, in short, was not doing very well. They botched some really easy opportunities with Trump and Clinton, and then Trump and Biden. You should have been blowing up, and instead, you just kind of fizzled out. You know, I mean, I get Gary Johnson, and they'll point to it. That was like double our previous high. But I mean, I felt like we could do better. And I don't blame anybody who feels we could do better. It was a huge opportunity. I mean, yeah, it was double our numbers, but double our numbers against Trump and Hillary? Yeah, I mean, maybe quadruple, maybe get me at least 10%. I don't know. Maybe I'm dreaming too big, but at least that's how I felt about it. So I don't blame anybody that wanted to see a big change in the Libertarian Party. The Mises Caucus may not be my style of change, but we needed a change, and it happened.
Yeah, as far as missed opportunities, I'll give you an example that I personally experienced. Back in October of 2020, there was this event in Austin, Texas, where I live, called the Constitutional Rights Summit. The party agreed to buy a table there, show up, have volunteers man the table, and you were going to have people out there protesting mask mandates, protesting, forced vaccines. It was pretty obvious that this was all anti-corona nonsense. I show up that morning, the first Saturday in October, and then our county chair decides to pull it out. And he pulled out largely because he saw maybe one or two Trump shirts or Trump hats, but he largely pulled out because it was an event that was opposing all of this corona nonsense. And then I see somebody like Angela McArdle, and I had never heard of Angela McArdle 3 years ago. And she has fought against this nonsense harder than probably anybody in the USA, maybe. I mean, look at how her star has risen in the last 3 years. And she's a wonderful activist, a wonderful person. I consider her a friend, a good friend. But after that event, I was just thinking, we have to do something here. If we're not going to, I remember seeing Joe and Spike speak, in 2020, they spoke about this corona nonsense for maybe 5 minutes in a 1 hour speech. It's like the Libertarian Party did not take the lead in being the anti-lockdown movement. They just let people like Alex Jones have it. And then they kind of said, well, Alex Jones is leading the movement. We don't want to be a part of it now. Well, if you'd taken the lead, you could have,
right.
Right.
When Republicans or Democrats take the lead on something and you follow along, you're sucked into their toxicity, right? And their issues. It's kind of like saying that you support overthrowing the government on January 6th. You're like, well, not for God Emperor Trump. I would love to see the government get overthrown, not for that reason, right? And I mean, similar to this last week, right? Like, let's abolish the FBI. Yeah, libertarians should have been talking about that for ages, and in defense of us, some of us have, and that's fantastic. I think it's tough timing when all of a sudden it's like, now you've got the Republicans being like, abolish the FBI, they investigated our God. And it's like, okay, well, let's make it so the Republicans have to join us as opposed to us joining on the Republicans. And I think your point is very well taken. That's why it's important to kind of, it's good as a libertarian to be ahead of the curve and be there before it's popular. That way you can say, hey, welcome aboard. When we were supporting open borders, and I just saw this poll showing it's now, become popular. Well, we were supporting that when it was unpopular. And so now anybody who supports open borders is like, hey, libertarians, we were already there. We beat you to the punch. I'm sorry, you're going to have to join us. Like Biden, nope, closed border dude made the situation even worse than Trump did. And Trump made it pretty bad. So, you got your last two presidents sucking at it. The libertarians right on the issue. Libertarians right on the drug war, way before the drug war was an unpopular thing, and so what it made it is so that everybody else, when you talk about the drug war, they have to deal with us, and we get to create the climate and the culture around it. The culture around being anti-drug war is largely positive. The culture around overthrowing the government, unfortunately, largely negative, but that's, like you said, that's kind of an order of operations thing.
Yeah. Do you think the arena reset happens if COVID is not in there?
If COVID, yeah, I do. The Mises Caucus had been persistent for a very long time. And I think that they were doing the fundraising, they were showing up. The Libertarian Party belongs to those who show up, is something that Nick Sarwark once said. As much as I very much dislike him, I totally understand what he meant. And the Mises Caucus showed up. They raised the funds. They went to the meetings. They did what it took. They fought tooth and nail. I mean, they recruited Republicans for a day to join some of these meetings to get this to happen, to make it so that they won. And so when you get to do these things and you fight hard to make it happen, there are successful things that are going to happen. People were predicting the demise of the Mises Caucus every time Joshua Smith would lose, right? Like, oh, he lost for chair. Oh, that's going to be it for the Mises Caucus. I remember Jacob Hornberger. They were like, this is the absolute zenith of the Mises Caucus, is whatever Jacob Hornberger can achieve. And after this, the whole experiment is done. And then, look at it 2 years later, they take over. So I think that they were working hard enough that even without COVID, it would have happened. I think COVID certainly radicalized many of them to make that happen, and rightfully so. These were authoritarian measures, some of the worst taken in our lifetime. We lost rights that will not be returned. I remember having a discussion with Nick Sarwark on Facebook. And I remember somebody said something like, we've lost rights we won't get back. And he's like, well, who lost rights? And I just linked him like time after time where people who lost their right to do something, right? Own a business, whatever it may be with their family, attend school, even a private school, all these things that they'd lost. And then he just never responded. He just didn't care. Right? Like who was in charge didn't care. So I have no doubt that the COVID issue radicalized some people to say we need to take control because this is a very serious authoritarian grasp we're seeing right now. And we need to do something about it. And the Libertarian Party, I mean, I can tell you from talking with the chairman, he did not care about that. And was he more dedicated to combating misinformation? Yeah, misinformation does need to be fought against. And there was a lot from the anti-vaxxer movement. Of course, there was a lot from the other side as well. And so the problem is when you only care about one side's misinformation, you place yourself into their camp and everybody, I want a liberty that represents all individuals' freedom, not just the people's freedom to not be sick from another person. That's certainly, if I want to make a business that says we will be wearing masks or you will be getting tested, that is the business's right, and they deserve the right to do that. And we should encourage them if it seems prudent to do that. On the flip side of the coin, if a government steps in and says you have to do these things, I mean, that's fascism on par with stuff that even Hitler would hardly dare to do, stuff that even Mussolini would say, I don't know, that's pretty invasive of business as far as things go. And we did it. Flat out, it happened. And so people should be upset about it. They were rightfully upset at the current regime. But I think the Mises Caucus was taken over anyway. They were doing a good job. Tea leaves were there. I think a combination of recruiting better, and then also driving out the people that would oppose you, that you didn't like, making life very uncomfortable for them. When you have followers, in the hundreds go after somebody who issues you a small criticism, that's a huge and powerful thing, so that you can say, even if you don't order it, you were aware of the culture that it's created, that these people are receiving these, this when criticism happens, it's unpleasant. So these people leave, and they left. And flatly, it's not that the Mises Caucus people don't receive the same amount of backlash and criticism either. I know that if you're in the Mises Caucus, I'm sure some people, I am sure, even just having the banner that says Mises Caucus, I am sure that you've had at least 100 critical messages. I'm sure you have to, right? So it's not just the critics. Both sides went at each other hard, and frankly, Mises was willing to wear it out. They said, yeah, hit us. We're still here. We're going to keep coming. Versus people like, and I'll admit myself, where I kept getting clobbered and I was like, this isn't fun anymore. I'm going to do something else, And so when you make it so the people who would oppose you leave, and that you can withstand those blows and stay in, you're going to win. So you win control of the Libertarian Party. And like I said, the world needs a strong Libertarian Party, and I wish them all the best.
What do you think the anti-Mises Caucus people really want?
All right, so there's two groups, and I'll try to answer for both. There's the visceral, foaming at the mouth. I guess they would be called the loser brigade, anti-Mises folks. And then there is just critics of the Mises Caucus. And I'll try to get both. I would say the first one, they don't know what they want. And I think that's exactly the problem. I think what they had, here's what they want. They want their social club back, because that's all it was. It wasn't politically successful, but I think they made a lot of friends, and I was one of the ones making friends along the way. I can see why that's enjoyable, but that's not really the point of a political party. You can make a lot of friends on social media. Go use that. You don't have to use a political party to say, you don't need a campaign to unite around. It helps for some people, but you should just be able to unite around causes, cultures, different identities, even just things like barbecue, like for myself, things that you can use to identify. And so one of the biggest problems with the anti-Mises crowd is that they didn't want anything. They just didn't want that. Spike Cohen talked about how he was a member of the Mises Caucus, but wanted and felt the Mises Caucus needed competition, to improve, give us something rational. I mean, the closest we got was the Pragmatic Caucus. That folded well before the Reno reset. And there really wasn't anything. When you're called the Pragmatic Caucus, it's already not very snazzy, right? So you're talking about being very down to earth. Don't get me wrong. I love being down to earth and grounded. It's just not very snazzy sounding. The media is not going to give you attention if you're a libertarian unless you grab it. So you do have to do something. And I felt what they wanted to do was do it, quote unquote, the right way. Suit and tie, file for this, file for that. Here's the problem. The right way kind of doesn't work with the monster we're fighting against, because they'll change it. Libertarians hit the threshold they needed to make the debate stage with Gary Johnson, and they just increased the threshold. We don't want them. I guess we'll just change it, because we don't want to hear from him. And so we need to prepare for that. So we need to be able to say, okay, so when this happens, when they challenge our signatures, when they increase the threshold, when they increase the voting threshold, what are we going to do? We can't get taken off guard when it does happen. And I think that the viscerally anti-Mises crowd, they just didn't want that change. Do they make some occasional good points? Yeah, there's some problems I have. And I think even most of the people in the Mises Caucus can point to at least one other time they've said this guy in the Mises Caucus said or did this thing, and that really sucked. Nobody's perfect, right? Nobody's an idol. So I think people that were looking for, I think what they wanted was this kind of, simple, quiet, we're doing the best we can, let's run a meeting really well kind of Libertarian Party. And that's just it wasn't working. And one of my biggest issues with them is they weren't saying anything while nothing was working. And so when they lost control, they threw a big fit. But when you're driving the car and you're not doing a very good job and somebody else decides to drive, listen, you may have a legitimate reason for them not wanting to drive. Maybe they're drunk or whatever. But if you keep hitting telephone poles, you're hardly the kind of person I want to hear from. So I think that the viscerally angry anti-Mises, that's my identity, is I'm anti-Mises, and that's all that I'm all about. I think that's what they wanted. As far as the generic critics, people like myself that got driven off of the party, that just kind of were like, well, this isn't fun anymore. I know for me, I wanted a culture that was really inclusive towards myself and my friends. I don't use another identity. I'm a writer. I write about video games. So I have legs both in the writing community and in gaming, right? I posted something the other day that shows I'm getting up to 40,000 unique views a day from those things. I bring in some mainstream stuff, and I want people to talk about libertarian stuff. I want to not necessarily hit them over the head with it, but just be like, hey, if you follow me because you think gaming is cool, here's some stuff I learned from gaming that I also see in like the world today. And I think you're going to enjoy that as well. And so the issue becomes, is this a safe environment, or is this a good environment even? Is this a positive environment for me to bring somebody into who has maybe imperfect beliefs, or who isn't, the model libertarian, or who just needs conversion, or has serious issues with it and needs to be spoken to, whatever it may be. I do think we need to be boldly libertarian. My issue is we shouldn't be edgy, or edgy in the sense that you're pushing people away that could have been your allies, because I do feel that happens often with the Mises Caucus in general. I remember myself when I was supporting Joshua Smith for chair. And I if you look at my history, anybody who follows me on Facebook, you can actually see the logo and everything that I had. I was supporting his run for chair. And I remember just offhand, I said, he doesn't perform, very well when he drinks and does debates. I think he should not drink and debate. And it was, well, Nick Sarwark drinks and you're just parroting hearsay, and like, this is the stupidest. And I had him and Mike Heiss talk to me or whatever about like how, no, it was totally fine. It's like, I'm not saying this because I hate your guts. I'm saying this because you don't perform well when you are drunk. I still feel that way, to be honest. And I did it. I mean, I said it when I was supporting him. I supported him all the way through the convention, by the way. It didn't make me leave my support. But when that's the kind of, you just get this strong, upset, angry backlash for sometimes legitimate criticisms. Some of the people, even for asking questions about the Tom Wood stuff, got kicked out of the Mises Caucus group. There's a very like my way or the highway about it. And I think that we want libertarianism to shine. I'm going to use another religious example. I used one earlier, but similar to Christianity, my goal is not to kill all the tax collectors or make all the tax collectors angry at me. My goal is to make people not collect taxes anymore. Was one of the goals of Christ. And so when that is the goal that I have for the Libertarian Party, my views on it have changed a bit. Obviously, there's some people who think that making transphobic, bigoted, homophobic jokes or something and is funny. There's some who promote race science on, in the public spheres. I don't know if they're doing it for irony or whatever. One of the things about making jokes and disparaging jokes, because that's part of, I make disparaging jokes with my friends, right? So it's not just you made a disparaging joke, you're out, right? One of the things about it with my friends and my family is they know I love them. I've invested in them, right? They know that there's a loving relationship there. So when I say something that's like sounds disparaging, or maybe even is, but in a joking format, it's well taken, versus when you just come at somebody who you're beefing with and who you don't like, and who it's obvious you don't like, and you make a joke about them killing themselves. It's not, oh, it was a joke, it was funny, they think it's hilarious. It's like walking up to, if you're a white person, you're like, well, I've used the N-word before because I had a bunch of black friends in high school and I used it all the time and it was totally fine. Well, go up to a bunch of strangers and say it and tell me what the reaction is going to be, right? This is not, you're not with your buddies in high school. A lot of people are like, oh, you haven't been into like this construction zone. Well, you're not in the construction zone anymore. You're a public figure now, right? There are people who don't work construction and don't like you whistling at women anymore. So it's inappropriate. I feel it's inappropriate even then too, but at the very least I can say it doesn't fit in this current culture. So my issue is I just don't like I think that there are potential allies to the liberty movement that are being isolated by a lot of the culture, a lot of the inability to take any amount of criticism, and the unwillingness to answer questions that are even performed in good faith, or even if they are not, to explain the full rationale. I think there's a lot of Mises Caucus folks, I believe it's a plank even or something to avoid the culture war or not participate in it. And I think the Mises Caucus folks, friends that I have even now, will say, yeah, we 90% talk about the culture war. Like we are in it now. I would have felt, I don't even like abstaining from the culture war. I think we should be aggressively loving, aggressively positive, aggressively diverse and bringing these people in and saying, you're welcome here. You're welcome here. And I don't think this is at the expense of anybody else. Look, I am a white, straight, male Christian, but I love being white, straight, male, and Christian. I love myself, but I also want somebody who is black, female, trans, and Muslim to feel good about themselves. This is individualism. This is the philosophy of individualism. We love individuals. As long as none of those things are statism, and none of those are, you should be welcome in the Libertarian Party. And I just didn't feel the culture was really aggressively loving enough towards those kind of people. It tolerated them before with the old regime, but now, I'll have friends and this is usually what leads to a lot of blocks for me, is I'll have a friend from like my gaming or writing community. Then all of a sudden from somebody in the liberty movement, will come in and talk about how they have a mental defect because they're gay, or how I actually brought up this meme as an example the other day when talking about this, because I can't believe that it exists and that it, like, people believe it. But there's this meme of this like gay person. They're like, somebody's talking to him and it's like, well, if you didn't groom people like you wouldn't exist anymore. So the only way that like gay or trans people exist is if they groom others. And the response, not only were there crickets from a lot of the Mises members, well, all of them, there was no pushback on the meme. But it was a lot of, yeah, I thought everybody believed this. And I'm not saying every person in the Mises Caucus is like that. In fact, when I issued my stinging criticism of the Mises Caucus and kind of a big blurb, I was surprised by how many people were like, well, I'm a member of the Mises Caucus. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I understand people's experience with the Mises Caucus is so different, And so that's kind of I want to make sure that they understand that this was a generalization of the Mises Caucus and my experience with them. Other people have different and more positive experiences, and that's good. Truth is not when you say this person's experience right and this person's experience is wrong. Truth is what you get when you combined everyone's experience. So for me, that's the best way I can explain to why I opposed the Mises Caucus. But in fairness, I didn't create something new either. I felt it was unpleasant. My strengths are better suited elsewhere, and I left. So like I said, it belongs to those who showed up, and I stopped showing up. So it was theirs to have.
The problem of libertarians not being able to respond well to criticism or not being able to respond well to questions, that has been a problem in the LP for a long, long time. And it didn't exist with the Mises Caucus. I hope, that maybe the Mises Caucus can fix it. But, I remember, making some comment on one of Joe's page, and I said something like, and I made a comment that, I think I said something like, Joe, you hardly talked about the lockdowns, but now you're talking about this. And then who comes on and makes a comment but Dan Fishman? And he says, well, I know you hate Joe. And I said, Dan, do you want me to show you the canceled check that I sent to a canceled check for $200 to the Jorgensen campaign? I don't hate Joe, but that's, there's almost, you'll always see somebody come up or they'll just say, well, you're just being negative. It's like I could point out if I pointed out a spelling error in a press release, the person who wrote the press release would say, well, you're just being negative, or you're anti-libertarian. Right. Said, no, I'm pointing out a spelling error.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if there's, and I have to admit it almost makes me not want to get involved too.
You're walking on eggshells the whole time. Yeah.
You can't make this criticism to help these people when you're sincerely trying to help, or sometimes even ask questions.
Yep.
I remember asking Christina Tobin, why she thought top 2 was bad. And I'd asked 4 or 5 people and nobody actually gave an explanation as to why they thought top 2 was bad. It was just like, well, they'd say like way to support the cause. It's like, tell me why top 2 is bad, and I've heard some arguments on that, but you know what I mean by top 2, where you have one big primary and then you take the top 2 candidates from there.
Oh yeah. There's love the sin, hate the sinner.
Yeah.
I still, despite my beef with Dave Smith, I still like him. I am aware I haven't blocked, we don't communicate together well, but I want the best for him, and I think that there's an element there where you just kind of say, we are better doing our own thing, and Godspeed to you, bow your heads, walk away, and sometimes that just needs to happen with people that recognize that they're not good together. Some people, there's some things that are hard to get over. And I think for some people, there's, Christ teaches like kind of infinite tolerance, and it's hard even for me to have, right? So when there's somebody like Vosh who goes out there and makes casual jokes about sex with children, and then sometimes actual philosophical points about sex with children, I'm like, I don't know if I can ever respect anything that I see from the guy ever again. And my friends will be like, well, check out this really cool thing that he said about, Jordan Peterson or something. And I'll be like, yeah, I agree with him in that post. But I'm still, I'll admit, having a tough time getting over this. Really, there is some messaging that is just bad.
Yeah.
And we need to admit when that happens, and kind of own up to it. The trouble is we disagree on what bad messaging is. And I don't know that there's an easy way to say it. You need a unified vision. Some people thought the anti-racist tweet from Jorgensen was really bad, and the Black Lives Matter tweet. The month those came out, and I actually released them because I was working on the campaign. By far our best month as far as getting more followers, getting money, everything like that. It was a very successful thing. The thing is she was so scared to agitate again after that because of the hate and the backlash. Thing is about weak and hateful people, they like to seem like there's a lot of them and seem big mouth, but they're really outnumbered. So one of the problems with Joe Jorgensen is a lot of people be like, Joe who? I mean, most of your mainstream friends do not know who Joe Jorgensen is. They've never heard of her name. Right. And that's because she didn't make enough splashes. At least if she committed to something, or just kept saying things that grabbed attention, not for the sake of attention, but of course, things that were libertarian, that people believed in, that were not off-putting, but designed to draw people in, then yeah, you can get people to be like, oh, wow, that's really cool. We're going to have people sign up for that. My issue with Joe Jorgensen is that outside of those tweets, she didn't really say anything. It's not that I needed them all to be the left, and I'll grant left leaning because they dealt with social issues, right? Like I didn't need her to be a lefty. I just wanted her to be equally radical for for some economic issues as well. You mentioned the lockdowns. Could have said something spicy there. Didn't.
Yeah.
Like say something spicy. We got our best month was when you said something spicy. Hateful people are going to be hateful people. There's nothing you can do about that. Like don't cater to them. Like you can address them, convert them, change them. You don't need to cast them off, but you can be like, hey, sorry, we're going to bring in more people doing this than just sitting around being quiet and doing nothing.
Yeah. I think there's a hard balance of trying to be edgy enough that you attract people, but not too edgy that you scare them away. And this is an example I like to use is, E.L. James in the 50 Shades series. I mean, that was spicy enough that it got people excited, but it wasn't too spicy that it scared them away. That was an extreme. I think if it had,
Sure.
I mean, there's stuff out there that makes that series look like a Sunday school picnic. I mean, but that stuff scares people away. But she was just enough where it was naughty. But I think 50 years earlier, it probably would have been completely rejected, and 50 years later, it'll probably be completely rejected because it's not spicy enough. But that's at least one example I use.
Right. Well, when you're a chef, you have to manage spice level, and that's going to vary based on who you're serving it to.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's very important. You think about your audience. Who am I serving this to? And so if I'm going to make something general on social media that I want to reach the whole world, how spicy can that be? Is every iota of spice I add is going to make somebody go, nope, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. So it's a tough job. I don't mean to make it sound easy. Believe me, if it was easy, my platform would be a lot more than 40,000 people viewing my gaming articles a day. You know what I mean? I would want people hitting me up on social media and all of my DMs. I'm lucky to get, 30 likes on a tweet. And so I'm who am I to go over here and judge a Libertarian Party when I'm like, oh, you guys went down from 3,000 to 2,000 last month, average tweet likes last month. I mean, who am I, right? It's a tough thing. And that's why professionals do it. I can still observe, much like a fan of sports, right? I still watch and I still I know what I want. Even if I'm not capable of hitting the home runs myself, I can still want them to be hit,
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think when you're in our position, you may have to do more stuff and you have to take more risks because, the Libertarian Party is the equivalent of an NFL team that has always went 1-15 or 2-14.
Yeah.
We're and yet when the LP gets that one win, they act like they've won the Super Bowl. And
right.
It almost seems like a lot of the people were just content with keeping the LP where it was. And
oh yeah,
not really. I mean, because really the LP has more or less went sideways since 1980. It's not really, and I think there's, and I definitely, I was calling for almost a great reset, back after the Angela Keaton fiasco in 2008, which I don't know if you know about that, but that was absolutely ridiculous. And in some ways, I also think that the Mises Caucus thing might have been somewhat generational because the Mises Caucus looks like it's mostly people in their 30s, which I'm fine. I'm fine with that. I know Dennis Pratt joined the Mises Caucus, and he's certainly an older member. In fact, he even in one talk admitted that he was a Russell Means supporter in 1988, so he wasn't even supporting Ron Paul then. But he said one thing that drove him to it was just seeing the crazy anti-Mises people. And you and other people have called out some of these anti-Mises people that just saying they're so toxic, they're driving people toward the Mises Caucus.
Now, to be fair, you should not join the other team. I host a show called Enemy of My Enemy. The enemy of your enemy is not always your friend. Yes. And so it shouldn't work that way. It does. And libertarians, you're going to have to get over that because that's human nature. And so unless you plan on having some psychological revolution, which has happened before. So if you want to get going on that, go ahead. But ultimately, this is the way human nature is now. And so we need to be able to say, okay, did I drive people towards something that is really bad? There is a ton of people. I remember when I was in this group, I think it was James Gentleman, but I remember I was in a Libertarian Party discussion group, and one of the commenters made him so upset. He was like, I'm donating money to the Mises Caucus, even though I'm supposed to be the unbiased moderator of this group, because I don't like you. And I remember it was just like, I don't like, that might not be the most logical thing. And I'm friends with James as well, so I don't want to trash him. But I remember just being like, wow, that is that is what people will drive you to do, because it makes you want to see the other side fail. And the thing is, when you're on a line, I mean, there's that meme, right? The person pushes them on a line. It's like, why did you join them? It's like, well, you were very pushy, right? So when you're pushing people out and pushing people away, they need to identify with something. I think one of the greatest, failures was instead of welcoming Tom Woods and Jason Stapleton and Dave Smith, when they all kind of, remember when they joined the Libertarian Party kind of roughly the same time, I was so excited. I still actually am big. I listened to Part of the Problem. I was a Tom Woods listener. I still enjoyed the show. It was a big part of my development as a libertarian. And I liked Jason Stapleton. Like, I was like, this is so awesome. This is such a big win. And I remember just people just trolling them, hating them, casting them out. So they had to form their own group. The Bible says it's not good for man to be alone. Well, so when you put man alone, they're going to find other people like them. So when you say you're out because of something bad, and maybe some of the criticisms were actually bad, but the thing is, when you cast somebody out because of something bad they've done, instead of pull them in, they are just going to unify with other people who have that as a similar identity. So part of the problem with the culture in the Mises Caucus that I have is directly created by that anti-Mises crowd. Because they cast those people out, they had no choice but to unify together. You look at, their stands on, they aren't as strong on borders. Some of them are even for government tyrannical borders. They aren't as strong on pro-choice. Some of them are for government control of a woman's body and regulation of that. They may have, and of course the bigotry issue, right? Which comes up every so often. Now, if you're in the Mises Caucus, you don't face it too much because of the fair game doctrine. The fair game doctrine says if our people do it, it's okay. It's if the other guys do it, they're toast, right? So, but it's bad on the outside. But all of those things were because instead of saying, oh, you believe that the fetus is a baby, let's bring you in, let's talk about it. And maybe we can convince you to be pro-life, but not use government force. I feel that would have been a very great conversation to have instead of get out of here. Yeah. You're just a pro-life, anti-choice, whatever. And then instead of being like, hey, I see that you like to make some of these jokes. Can I tell you how that makes me and my friends feel? Maybe don't make those jokes. There was never that conversation. It was just, look at this. This person's bad for liberty. This person's bad. Cast them out. Push them away. Don't talk to them about it. Condemn them, right? And instead of bringing in, hey, can we talk about this? Because I really don't like this. It was immediate. It was an immediate punch in the face. And while there were maybe some people, myself included, who tried to talk to some of these people and be like, hey, maybe that's not the way to do it. When they are getting a direct smack in the face, I got to look at the guy who's smacking him in the face and be like, dude, I'm trying to do something right now. Right? Like, Nick, I am trying to do something that's going to be awesome for everybody. You need to calm down, and I just think that we cast, I was part of it. Obviously I was trying to be, I beefed with the people who were part of it, but the Libertarian Party, was just so eager to cast out and say, you people don't get a seat at the table, that the only way they were going to get a seat at the table was to band together, make an identity, and take over. So while you might not like the takeover language, it hasn't bothered me. I've said this on my show before, because you made them take over. There was no working with you. There was no working with the people that were cast out. They were so aggressive and angry and upset about anything you would do because of the slightest error. And look, are some of those errors and grievances legitimate? Yes. I think it would have been very appropriate for some of them to be like, that wasn't my best moment. I really don't want to go down that path anymore. That's great. Daryl Davis converting the KKK. Do we cast those people out of humanity because of who they were before? No, we say, welcome back, become one of the big things you actually talked about Daryl Davis before, and he's a huge inspiration for me. One of the big identifiers for him is they're in a social circle right now. They're not going to leave that social circle just to be alone. They're going to need to join a different social circle. So it's big to him to say, you're my friend now. Let's be friends. This is a new system that you've got going on. So when you cast these people out, what did you expect them to just die? Of course they're not going to die. People don't do that. They want support. They want community. So they formed a community and said, I still believe in liberty. these guys aren't doing a very good job. They cast us out. We have to take over.
Yeah, and you know why wasn't Tom Woods a problem at the national convention in 2018, but he was in 2022? I mean, it's funny how all of these things, people that weren't so-called problematic people suddenly became problematic.
The Tom Woods thing is
yeah,
a bit of an exception because of, obviously there are allegations there. If you see them and hear them, please look into them. That's all I'll say. More will reveal itself in time, but yeah.
And I mean, it's a question, does the LP only want people who have always been libertarians? I mean, you've admitted you've changed. I mean, Tom Woods is certainly somebody who's evolved, and Spike Cohen admits that he was pro-war too. I mean, I think for me, it's probably maybe because I felt like I've always been a libertarian that I don't really know what it's like to be converted or not be in the circle. So, but and if somebody comes in, say, agreeing with you on 70%, or on 80%, can you figure out how to get them to 90 or 95 instead of just saying we're throwing them out because they don't agree with us on everything? You're not going to find the perfect libertarian. It's
right. And it's not that the 5% that you say, oh, that's not important. Look, everything's important. Every issue is important because most of what we talk about is when we deal with politics, well, politics is ruled by violence, right? So even the smallest political issue kills people, right? Kills people when we let government control it. So obviously it's really hard to compromise with somebody when they're like, well, I support this murder. You're like, oh, it's hard to talk with you when you're like this. You know what I mean? When you believe that. But instead of doing that, we need to be able to say, okay, I understand you feel that way. I really disagree. It's important to me that you feel differently. Let me talk with you about some things. I want to hear your perspectives. The best way to convert people is by listening to them first. I felt one of the most important conversions we see in the Bible is with Zacchaeus, tax collector again. And what Christ does is listen to him, right? Here's what's going on. Look, he's got a family to feed. He's got violent people looking over his shoulder as well. He's part of the system. There's reasons to feel sorry for him. And yet what he says is, I'm going to find a way to reimburse all this money that I took. Because even though the government made me take it, I'm the one that took it. I'm personally responsible. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think so you got to listen to them, right? Listen to their grievances. Even if you don't think their grievances are good, you need to sit down and practice listening. I'm not always a great example of this. I hope to do better at this. But before making a snap judgment about somebody who is probably lashing out and hurt, an animal caught in a trap will lash out at anything close to it. When you see it's caught in a trap, your demeanor changes. Animals pick up on that demeanor. So when they pick up that you have come to help them with the trap, they are suddenly open to being approached. People don't like to take criticism from somebody that's constantly bagging on them. I make it a policy on my own social media. If I only have negative interactions with somebody, you're banned, you're blocked. Why would I put myself through it? Whereas if there's somebody who has invested in me, liked 10 of my posts or commented something really positive and they're like, man, I really like this, and then says something like, I don't think you nailed it here. That criticism means so much more, right, than somebody else who's just no. So when I come forward and I'm like, I really like this person, this is a criticism that I have, that means a lot more. And the problem is, and unfortunately, I've given you some examples of with the Mises Caucus, unfortunately perpetuating the issue within itself, of no criticisms are allowed, no matter how much positivity goes around. But that certainly goes for people outside of it, that when people are like, I have this small, even if it's a problem, like I said, all statism is bad. So if they have this statist issue, can you at least be able to say, tell me why you think that? I want to hear your perspective. I want to hear your experience. I want to know all about it. Like I said earlier, the truth comes not when we eliminate somebody's experience, but when we collect everyone's experience and see them all together. We need all those perspectives to truly see a single, we all only have one point of view. The truth, according to Hodey Johns, is not the truth of the universe. This is a huge thing online, and somebody will say, oh, there's no racism. I've lived in this city and I've never once seen racism ever. It's like, okay. And then somebody will come around, they'll be like, well, all I see is racism. One of the ones that I've been dealing with recently is a Christian. All Christians, judgmental, bad people, very, evil to each other and raise their kids tyrannically or whatever. I'm like, well, I don't do that. That's not my experience with it. So the idea isn't to throw out one person's the others. It's to kind of collect all these different perspectives and say, okay, what is actually going on here? Because liberty shines when there's the maximum number of individuals involved, right? The great part of the philosophy of individualism is it's made stronger by individuals. So we want all those perspectives.
Well, okay. You have anything you want to say to wrap up this call? I mean, we're going to have to get off here in about 2 minutes.
Chris, thank you so much for making me part of your inaugural episode. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best. Interview shows are tough. Yeah. And tough to get lined up, tough to organize, got to coordinate with other people, but I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you, honestly, I appreciate you reaching out and giving me an open mic. Like I said, I know it's easy to draw extremes, and I appreciate you being, even though you're in the Mises Caucus and I'm not, you're kind of a fellow person that is not in the extreme, that is like that we can be friends. This is not something that needs to divide us. And so I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And I think if you keep that mentality, your show's going to go a long way.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.